everybody. Welcome back to the Global Fund Voyage podcast, your guide to navigating through the world of investments and market insights. I'm Juliana.
And I'm Marcus.
And today we will be discussing a very special topic, a place we all call home, and as you can see from the background, Singapore. So we will be discussing exciting developments for the nation as it approaches SG60, with regional opportunities such as the Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone to broader challenges such as declining birth rates as well as stock market transformations. To help us unpack this, we have invited a very, very special guest from Nikko Asset Management, Kenneth. Kenneth, maybe you can give yourself a very short introduction.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Kenneth. I work in Nikko Asset Management as a senior portfolio manager, and I cover Singapore equities.
Thank you, Kenneth.
Sure.
So maybe we can begin with the conversation proper. I'll ask this question to both Kenneth and Marcus. Maybe Marcus first. With Singapore and Malaysia signing the Johor-Singapore Special Economic Zone agreement, how will this impact Singapore and drive its economic growth?
Okay, I think I can try to summarize it in 3 points. But the first point is Singaporeans will love it because we love to travel to JB. But conversely, also a lot of Malaysians travel to Singapore to work. So I think that's the first good thing about this special economic zone is the strengthening and the integration of both Singapore and Johor, because both sides have their strong points. So Singapore has their advanced infrastructure and technology. Johor has also strong labor supply and also land supply. So by combining these two elements together, it helps to promote the region's attractiveness and eventually will lead to more inflows of investments. I think second thing also is job creation. I think with this special economic zone, there's going to be a lot more job opportunities created, especially at the higher skilled labor and also in general over the overall labor market. So it's positive for both sides of the both countries. And then lastly is on expansion opportunities. I mean, we always talk about businesses. You always start local, and then one way to actually grow the business is to expand. So by having this special economic zone, businesses in Singapore and Malaysia can also look to explore and expand their business across the border. So those are my 3 points. But I think Kenneth will be able to share a lot more in detail, on what's so special about this special economic zone.
Well, well said, Marcus. I think you have hit the spot very well. This agreement actually helps to affirm and strengthen the symbiotic relationship between Singapore and Malaysia, which has existed for a fairly long time. Singapore, as you have pointed out, really has a very strong global footprint in finance and logistics, while Johor has a very competitive land, labour and energy resource base. Put together, we actually have a very compelling opportunity for the global investor in a time of what we call shifting global supply chains, especially in a fairly fragmented geopolitical landscape. Well, in terms of benefits, if I can dwell a little bit deeper, Johor tends to benefit a little bit more directly. Exports and investments into key sectors such as industrials and tourism. Singapore benefits will come maybe a little bit more indirect, a bit softer in nature, through, as you pointed out, higher productivity, land and labour optimization. But longer term, we think this is actually a good segue for both governments to really strengthen and integrate together as both economies. If you go maybe to the companies that could benefit in Singapore, well, Singapore has very well-run financials or banks, which will better help facilitate investment and trade lending, as well as industrial companies that are located in both markets will also benefit from this initiative.
Thank you very much, Kenneth, for giving us a more detailed, explanation of how this special economic zone can benefit both parties. I think the second question then is more on Singapore. Is Singapore's future at risk? Elon Musk also recently, brought up some concerns about the impact of declining birth rate, and it is a common trend across developed markets. So, is this a big concern for Singapore?
Well, it's a very good question, Marcus. Singapore's future continues to be a very ongoing debate among policymakers. Singapore's rise to a first world nation has achieved remarkable success and great stability, but it also faces a lot of challenges that every first world economy faces. Regarding what Elon Musk mentioned, the declining birth rate as well as the aging population, Singapore is not alone in this struggle that is really faced by many developed economies. We think that the government has already stepped in to address many of these problems. Number one, they have addressed by through government paternity benefits, improving childcare support, and also ramping up what we all know HDB BTO supply. And that has really also helped to really address some of these challenges. At the heart of this issue, Marcus, is really how can we balance both the need for good economic productivity as well as improving the life of all Singaporeans. As we know, many of us are concerned about cost inflation, which remains a top of mind issue for all Singaporeans. Well, this year is SG60. As we step into this year, I'm optimistic that we will see more steps by the government to really help Singapore future-proof the economy. We have seen some, indication that AI can be helped in terms of how we can use it to future-proof jobs. And we also believe that it will also help strengthen Singapore's core in its financial, education, and healthcare centres.
Thanks, Kenneth. Maybe next question to Marcus. How do global geopolitical challenges shape Singapore's future? With regards to like your China-US impact and things like that. Yeah.
I think this kind of is just nice. When we wrapped up the previous episode, we talked about Donald Trump and US coming into power. So Donald Trump's policies are mainly on tariffs, right? And of course, naturally people will question, Singapore is very trade dependent. Will this actually affect Singapore? That is a good question to really think about. And the threat of new tariffs would dampen trade growth, impact Singapore's broader economic performance. And in general, a stronger US dollar just means a difficult path for equity markets in Asia in general. But Singapore ultimately is actually not that affected, by higher tariffs. If you look at the trade relationships between Singapore and the US, we are actually on a trade deficit with the US. So we're actually a net importer. So even if US increases its tariffs on exports from Singapore, we are not that affected. So there's a less likelihood of Singapore actually getting impacted by the tariffs that are implemented by the US. Singapore also has, been strategically benefiting from the diversification of supply chains out from China, especially right now with Donald Trump actually pressuring China a lot on a lot of these issues. So a lot of companies are looking to diversify their supply chains out of China, and Singapore would also be a prime location for businesses to look to set up factories and businesses as well. And lastly, with Singapore's trade-weighted policies, Singapore has a relatively high correlation with the US interest rates, so therefore it helps to grant a little bit more resilience overall in general.
Can you have anything to add in regards to this?
No, I think that's well put, because if you think about the role of Singapore today, clearly nobody wins in a scenario where there are trade tariffs. But because Singapore is in a little bit of a different position compared to the other ASEAN economies, Singapore actually runs in a current account surplus that is actually very healthy. And in many accounts, the service exports in Singapore are actually growing, and that can help to really offset some of the challenges that we actually see for the broader ASEAN and Asian economies. So we may obviously have an impact from trade tariffs, but Singapore is actually a lot well positioned, as what Marcus has actually mentioned.
Yeah, so Kenneth, maybe another question, and now to you again. Does Singapore's stock market need a transformation to stay relevant? Recently, SGX mentioned that they're looking at ways to improve the stock market attractiveness of Singapore. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, it's a very interesting question. I guess in many regards, the obvious answer is clearly yes. I mean, everybody wants to really see a lot more liquidity, a more vibrant stock market. But I would caveat to say that the impetus to change doesn't really mean that we need to overhaul the stock market either. We need a transformation to stay relevant. As you know, the Singapore market is fairly well represented in financials or banks, as well as the REIT sectors. And together they actually form a very concentrated part of the market. We lack fast-growing sectors such as internet, technology, and healthcare, and the market needs better diversity in order not to be so concentrated in the financial and property sectors. this is important because for fund managers like us, we are active managers, and portfolio management can be quite prohibitive if the market is overly concentrated. So while we agree that there is some transformation that we need to see, there's also no need for an overhaul. I remembered, 10 years ago when we celebrated SG50, there was a very wise comment made by our former Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. He said that success in the future will not be as much as about continuity as it is about change. What he meant is that it's about applying old principles in new situations to meet new realities. So managing the stock market can also mean being very clear and cognizant of your strengths and being adaptive to these strengths to remain relevant for the future. So what I mean by that is that in Singapore, we always believe one of the key areas of strength is really its high and attractive dividend appeal. We have many dividend yielding stocks, and we believe that Singapore, or the merits of investing in Singapore, can come from what we call income generation or a dividend focused strategy. This is an area where Singapore has actually built itself very well. So we are actually very excited as an investor in Singapore on what we call dividend anchors and dividend growers, which are part of our dividend strategy in Singapore. If I can elaborate, dividend anchors are very high sustainable dividend stocks which help to really anchor the portfolio in Singapore. They are really made up of the financials, the REITs, and they pay a very high level of dividend. Right? Dividend growers are not exactly high dividend payers, but they have the prospect of dividend growth. And that can actually make the growth narrative of Singapore a lot more excited. So we believe that is actually one of the strong attributes for Singapore that doesn't need to change, but just needs to be adapted in the new forward future economy.
Marcus, then with regards to that, then do you think that the Singapore stock market is overly reliant on traditional sectors like banking and property, like your REITs and all those?
Yeah, so like what Kenneth said, Singaporeans love their bank stocks.
Yes.
They love their REITs because dividends is a big part of this strategy. And for Singaporeans, when they are moving into retirement, these generally are the stocks that they'll look at. But when you look at the entire Singapore market in general, banks and REITs take up about 70%. So it is a little bit concentrated just from a market breakdown. But from a trading perspective, in terms of volume and turnover perspective, they are also one of the most traded, companies and tickers on the exchange itself. But if I can elaborate a little bit more of why the Singapore market is a little bit too concentrated in the banks and the REITs, is because of how Singapore has actually advanced over the years. Singapore has, kind of positioned themselves as a global financial hub, especially in the Asia region. So generally, all the banks have benefited as Singapore has progressed over the years. So naturally, the banks has benefited from this transformational change. Singapore also has land scarcity. I think Singapore is a very small island, so there's a lot of demand for all these kind of REITs or property developers to actually create these projects. So generally, because of these two factors, that leads to a concentration in the stock market in Singapore. But I think over time, we believe there will be a lot more representation from other sectors which can provide growth, which Kenneth, you also brought out that Singapore do lack some fast-paced growing companies. I think key sectors to look at are renewable energy, technology, transportation, and data. As we can see, a lot of now the current trend of the economy is focusing a lot on technological advancement and data centers.
Okay, then maybe to the very last question for today. Kenneth, what does the future hold for Singapore's evolution? Any forward-looking statements with regards to this, to Singapore?
Right, thanks Juliana. Well, we are quite excited. The policy initiatives that's been designed to revive the Singapore stock market have been progressing fairly well. We are quite constructive and encouraged with the announcements to help revitalize the market. As we progress into 2025, we expect these measures from the MAS in its upcoming review to include what we call supply side and demand side solutions. What we think these are likely to be would be ways to help better what we call capital intermediate to make Singapore a lot more vibrant, a lot more deeper in terms of stocks that we can look at, and also broaden the diversity of the overall market. And when that takes place, we see the prospect of valuations being re-rated in certain sectors, particularly in industrials, in technology and consumer staples. Moreover, we believe that these measures will also help to boost liquidity and valuations for the overall market, particularly the mid-caps, which are defined as companies with the market cap between 500 million to 5 billion in terms of market capitalization. As Marcus talked about the different sectors that can be introduced or can be invested in, we actually believe that this is actually what we call the new Singapore narrative. And that's really important. We actually coined this narrative in the SG50 year, which was in 2015. And essentially what New Singapore means for us is that it really represents the future of the Singapore economy, built on innovation, adaptability, as well as its relevance. So it embodies Singapore's success in establishing as an exporter of the world. That's what we aspire to be a very successful hub for trade, for financial services, and for many other growth sectors in Singapore. So as you have asked, Juliana, what do we expect? We think as we enter SG60, we believe the cornerstone of Singapore's success will be really in this export sector, in financial services, in transportation. We know Singapore has a very deep as well as premier wealth management hub in Asia. We are one of the leading centers for global trade, for transportation and logistics. And Singapore has evolved into this global center of excellence over many years. Today, we actually do see Singapore as a big player. We actually account for 4% of Singapore does account for 4% of global exports in services. And that really shows how Singapore has really moved up to be a vibrant financial center to the global economy.
And yourself, Marcus, any comments?
I guess a lot of times people tend to overlook Singapore's market. It tends to be small, but Singapore is small and quick at the same time, packs a very powerful punch at times. So I'm feeling very confident with Singapore moving forward. Especially last year, Singapore's stock market actually proved to be one of the best performing developed markets, stock markets in general. So moving on to SG60, I have this running joke because when I joined iFAST, they were filming this National Day special, right? And I couldn't count how old was Singapore. So this time I will count it right. Next is Singapore SG60.
The iFAST TV team can invite you back for another episode on National Day. For National Day
My
as well.
reputation got destroyed. That's on that video.
Okay, I think thank you to both of you. I think we will conclude today's episode. Thank you, Kenneth, for making your way down today. And thank you, Marcus, for co-hosting this episode together with me. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Global Fund Voyage podcast. Until the next episode, stay curious, stay informed, and happy investing. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.